Well, I am so glad to welcome back a former guest and friend of the Equip for Life podcast, Gary Freeman, except you are now running your own nonprofit now. So last time we had you on, you were part of CareNet. You were kind of running the fatherhood wing of CareNet, which is still going on. They've got someone else kind of helping out with that. But you went ahead and left because you were really passionate about starting something else. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, and then I'll set up some of the things that I want us to talk about today.
Cool. Well, first, it's glad to be back.
So good to have you back, man.
With the man, Josh Brown. I'm excited, man. So, man. So Major League Dad is more of a local aspect.
Yep, you're in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So really dealing with the conviction, I guess you could say, that I had been praying through and, loved my time at CareNet, loved my people, my CareNet folks. But there were certain things that I just feel like the Lord was leading, and praying with my wife and like, hey, I think this is something a little deeper. So he's calling us a little deeper. So Major League Dad is where, that kind of formulated from and what we get to do. Yeah. So, man.
You really went through a very similar journey that I did, where it's like I was doing good work at a place, and then I just had a passion and a vision for a certain thing that I just couldn't fully realize at the previous thing, even though it's easier to stay at the previous thing. Like ultimately, it was helpful for you to be able to just kind of have the freedom to kind of spread your wings and follow that vision, which is a really exciting, but also I know like a really scary and hard thing. And you are now in that terrifying journey that I was in, 5 or 6 months after we started here. I was like, how are we going to make this thing happen? Is it even going to last? Like, I get that. I feel for you so much. But just explain a little bit about what Major League Dad is doing in Raleigh.
Yeah. So Major League Dad, there's still for me a focus in terms of like the pro-life, world and movement and dealing with fathers. So all of that is still my aim. Yeah. But in understanding through working in the local, working in the national settings, there were just holes in terms of not a lot of proactive aspects of how you deal with fathers and families and the abortion issue, right? So really thinking through, we want to make abortion unthinkable.
Right.
Okay. Well, what I just started hearing a lot of times was there was a lot of stressors and things, and you hear me kind of say that a lot, that people deal with, that if you help to eliminate those, their abortion becomes unthinkable, because now they feel like they have the tools and things they need to actually have a family. Yeah. And that's God's design. So there's real quick, 3 parts of kind of Major League Dad. There's this pre-fatherhood focus. So I do a lot of things trying to work with young men to put a healthy thought of what fatherhood actually is. So one of my pet peeves, all right, I'm just going to go ahead and go there. So when I hear all the time, we just need men to step up. I cringe. The reason I cringe is because you want somebody to step up who doesn't know anything. So who steps in to help these young men to understand how to step up, right? So when I'm having these conversations, I'm in these schools, I'm in these organizations in the community in Southeast Raleigh. It's like if they don't have a father in the home, or they have an inactive father in the home, I can break that down. That's something where it's like Major League Dad looks to come in, walk with them, give them a healthy view of fatherhood. Wow. So if you don't have a healthy view of fatherhood, the pattern naturally is your girlfriend's pregnant, crap.
Right.
There's no, excitement. There's no like, I can do this. So that father is just in a place of standstill. So that's one aspect. Then you have the active, which is still in the crisis pregnancy situation. So still working with pregnancy centers, trying to create some partnerships with the center where I actually started in Raleigh. So that's been pretty cool.
That's so cool.
Oh man, I love it, man. Because that's local, my folks, how I got my start. So kind of banging my head up against a brick wall with them. And now it's kind of like, they're like, Gary, you're back. And I'm like, it's cool. It's just me. It's G.
I know how that can go.
So that's been pretty cool. So still working with young men. I still go to, any of the centers, work with guys, meet with guys one-on-one, deal with that heaviness.
Nice.
In that. So I love that aspect.
Cool.
Yeah.
You're
so
great at that.
The pre-fatherhood, the active, and then the post. So a lot of times post-abortive men dealing with that. I feel like that's a good place for churches also to kind of step it up in terms of how serving the community, right? So dealing with post-abortive, if they have miscarriages, how do they feel dealing with the emotional stuff? Like, like digging deep into that and what that looks like. So Major League Dad looks to handle those things to make abortion unthinkable. Yeah. So that's the aim. So.
That's really cool.
Yeah, man.
So I want to unpack some things.
Yeah.
But like the reason that you're local right now, you and I were talking about this yesterday, like, you know, as much as like, I imagine a lot of our listeners could be like, we want this to be national. We want this to be huge, and maybe one day it is. But like, there's a reason why right now this is local. Beyond the fact that it's so young. I mean, you're like in your second trimester as an organization. You know what I mean? Like you're like 5 months old or something.
Yeah.
But part of it is so much of what you're doing is so active, working either one-on-one with people or like in neighborhoods. Like you said that you were teaching like. Not exactly Financial Peace University, but something kind of like that, like classes, just to try to help people with those stressors.
Yes.
Like a lot of the things that you're doing is so relational and is not scalable, at least right now, is you're still like trying to figure out like what are the ways that I can help all of these people.
Right.
It's not like us where we can just kind of like we learn some things on the campus and like let's make a video or let's make a podcast or whatever. It's kind of like, hey, let's just like spread the word to everyone. Like you like so much of what you're doing is not scalable, at least not right now. Right. Maybe eventually you'll be like, hey, here's a bunch of training videos on how to do this in the city. But right now, like you've got to be local. But like you were really getting into the ditch with people.
Yeah, man.
And doing things that a lot of other people, like if they might want to do some kind of ministry, they might want to help people, but they're a little bit more scared to do some of the things that you're doing. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think that's a conviction that I feel like the Lord has given me in terms of going deeper. That's what I meant by that, and why local and focusing right where I am. Like that's why we wanted to live where we live, and God blessed us to be able to be in this neighborhood, to be in this aspect of Southeast Raleigh there's a lot going on, affordable housing.
Yeah.
I'll leave that alone. But one of the things that's really, really key in what you're saying about being local is just going deep with people. That's a huge conviction of mine. And it's like, I don't like to necessarily depend on the Christianese of saying discipleship, but that's ultimately what I'm getting to.
Yeah.
In terms of being able to walk with people and hopefully and prayerfully put them in places where there's long-term relationships that are built. So that's why I still work with a lot of local churches in the area, trying to like create this space. But one of the fights is in the local church, and how I kind of approach things is like, does it fit into the church's agenda? You know, and I'm
what is the church's agenda if it's not loving God and loving people, though?
Exactly. So it's like I'm trying to present something in terms of this is how an active way of how the congregation can be in the same, like it's in the same community.
Right.
So if I'm, having these conversations and getting these couples, families, young men, whatever, man, I want to bring them to X church to say, hey, this young man, he needs men to rally around him, to walk with him, to go get in the ditch as well, because we don't want him to stay in the ditch, obviously.
Right.
But that's where he is.
Right.
So let's go scoop him up and walk with him. And that takes time.
Yes.
That's my whole, I have this like weird little theory of the microwave versus the crock pot.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So, push a lot of us want to push a minute, forget about it, come back and get it out.
Yeah.
Crock pot takes a while. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like this is a Major League Dad is a crock pot type ministry.
And it's more involved. You're not putting the thing, in the microwave and just like it's going to do it. It's like you got to like work with this and be involved and attentive throughout.
Yeah. But you know what? What's so cool about it is, and maybe it's just because I'm a foodie.
Yeah.
As you can tell.
I'm getting there, by the way. My whole life has changed. I'm like watching the Food Network now. I don't know what is happening.
Great, right?
My wife and I are making dinners together so often in the kitchen. Nice. It's super cute. We're listening to love songs. We're super grossing out the kids.
You gotta like video that stuff and just remember and reminisce, and
it's really fun.
It's like Hallmark moments. But
I didn't used to be able to do anything with food. I could make like bacon, and that was kind of the extent of it. But now I'm getting really into it. And
nice.
I'm following with where you're going now.
Yeah. So it's kind of like you enjoy the process. You know, you enjoy cutting up the vegetables. You enjoy putting them in. You enjoy the flavors and the smells. Oh gosh. So I feel like that's what it's about, and that's a process. And those smells that we want to lift to get a little faithy here, but that's the smells that I want to lift to God. I want to build his kingdom that way and walking with people and present this, as this conviction I feel like he's given me. So, yeah, man.
So here's where I want to go today. Now that you are your own thing, you have the freedom to just kind of say whatever you want.
Which is scary, but...
Which is scary. I know that fear. And if you're like me, you're going to sometimes make mistakes and say things that you probably shouldn't say or say too much or say too... I
get it.
It's going to be
I'm learning.
Your world for the rest of your life. Just welcome. We're going to make mistakes, and hopefully there's enough grace. And,
exactly.
We're all trying.
Exactly.
But sometimes it's helpful for people to hear things that a lot of people aren't willing to talk about or don't really want to hear. So you have some freedom to get into some stuff that maybe you haven't always had.
Yeah.
And I want to take advantage of that.
Because most definitely.
I know you. We have developed a relationship over the last several years.
Yeah.
There's trust there. And I know a lot about the way that you think.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to bring people on this podcast who think well and have ideas that are worth other people considering. It doesn't mean that everyone has to agree with everything.
Right.
The last episodes that we just published as of when we're filming this, who knows when this is going to go out? Our production schedule is slowed up right now because we're so understaffed. But as of right now, we just put out these 2 episodes with a Muslim intellectual who basically became pro-life and is, potentially committing career suicide by coming on and outing himself. So it's he and I had a philosophy debate for a half an hour at the end of part 1. And it's not everyone's going to agree with everything that guy says or even maybe what I say. And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's just good for people to understand more about where Muslim people are coming, whether they're pro-choice or pro-life and why. It's culturally different than where most of our listeners are coming from. And so there's value to that. I like getting people outside of their echo chambers.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite things.
And you're pretty good at that, Josh.
It's one of my favorite things because I'm trying not to be in echo chambers, and I just kind of want to spread that love.
Understood. I get it.
And you have ideas that are different than a lot of pro-life peoples, or at least a lot of pro-life conservatives.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that. I just want to pick your brain and again just give people something to think about because I don't even know if I'm going to agree with every single thing that you say today. I'll probably be pretty close, but if nothing else, but you are worth listening to.
Oh, that's
scary. You have a good mind. You do. I mean, maybe.
Don't say that. It's like, praise God,
I think you're really thoughtful, and you have the ability to hear from both sides, and try to separate the wheat from the chaff, if to use a kind of more biblical example. And so I kind of want this to be, what's a white pro-lifers hear from you kind of a thing a little bit. You know what I mean?
Oh, man,
because I just really respect you. So maybe to set a little bit of groundwork.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about where you feel like you fit on the political spectrum. You know, just so kind of people have okay, here's kind of where he's coming from. Are you super conservative? Are you super liberal? Are you somewhere in between? Just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, okay. So I think just to be real blunt is I don't fit.
Yeah.
But to explain a little in terms of, I feel like a bit of a unicorn.
Yeah.
In terms of just what my life has enabled me to see in terms of political or just race and just, because growing up in predominantly black church, now serving, in different respects in predominantly white church and histories in both and blah, 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 blah. And the fact that there is an actual and had to be a black church, and that's another discussion. But these are things that I kind of come to when I think of how both arenas, because they have been my arenas for a long time in terms of my dad was a pastor, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But churchiness and what that gets into the politics, and then politics on its own. And there's things that I see and I would say agree with on both ends. I can't just give myself to one area. I just can't because there's
There's too much you disagree with in both major parties, is what I hear you
saying. Yeah. So what I agree with is minimal. What I disagree with is major. Right? So that's why I just got to be honest. I don't feel like I fit in either.
Yeah.
But again, I try to, in many respects, respect those who do like commit to one place or another. And that's why I feel like a big part of what I try to do is just listen, man. Like if I hear, if I'm in certain areas, especially in the pro-life world, being the fly in the milk, a lot of times I hear a lot of things and I'm just like, okay, yeah. And in my mind, I'm like, why the heck did you just say that to a black man? And then,
oh my gosh, it's so cringy.
It's like, so
I've been around you those times, like at pro-life conferences where someone's saying, it's just like, how do you not understand what is happening right now?
Yeah.
And how I'm cringing for them. And sometimes you'll kind of speak up a little bit and kind of help them understand it. Sometimes you just kind of like smile and nod.
Yeah.
And, whatever.
Just to be pleasant, to, but to be fair, then there's some of my liberal friends that I'm like, I feel like a lot of things are scapegoatish because of race and because of certain things where, no, we can kind of step in here and we can make some moves.
What do you mean by scapegoatish?
So I would say in terms of like, in just throwing the stone or just blaming, the right or whatever, about
everything.
Yeah, literally. Okay. But to kind of narrow that down, the pro-life aspect of things and what does that mean? Because the pro-life like phrase tag is so charged and all that kind of stuff. It's like, breathe, slow down. And I mean that more from, I'm still talking about from my more liberal friend. Like, it's like, oh, you're pro-life. Whoa.
Right.
Like,
they think that means a lot of other things too.
Exactly. And I'm like, wait,
right.
Let's talk about it.
Listen.
And then it's almost like, okay, are you done? Are you done? Okay, cool. You ready to talk? Okay, let's talk. So that's where, for me on both sides, I have to exercise patience a lot of times and be like, okay, but then it brings me when I go home at night and I'm like, what are we doing? Yeah. Like, because what I get to do with Major League Dad now is there's people still in the midst of all that stuff. I go back to people that are dealing with things, that are dealing with the stressors of life and trying to figure it out because of all the stuff that's happening in these camps. So,
I think a lot of our listeners will be excited to hear from you, even hearing you say that, because frankly, that's really similar to where I am politically. And I haven't talked a lot about this, but I don't label myself as a conservative anymore because there is enough that I disagree of things that are happening within the conservative movement right now or the Republican Party. Yeah. Obviously, I'm pro-life.
Right.
But I've got like some things that I'm like, I agree with most conservatives on, or like I'll be areas where like I agree with like David French a lot of times on certain things. Yeah. And then I've got a few social issues or things that I'm more on the liberal side on now, and then some that I'm kind of more like a little bit leaning kind of libertarian in some ideas. And just there is no home for me. I'm politically homeless. There's no label that works, which just makes a lot of people mad because they want, me on their team. They want everyone on their team, and I don't really have a team.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do and what I would like more people to do is instead of picking the way that you feel about every issue based on what your party platform is, or what your favorite pundits say, is case by case basis. What should my view be on this one, on this one, on this one, on this one, regardless of, who you vote for president.
Yeah.
It's like Sam Harris was talking about this recently on a podcast, on a really good podcast, where it's just kind of like, people need to be slower to form their opinion.
Yes.
Couldn't we just like, people feel this urgency, like, I need to come up with an opinion, like right now, this new thing happens, Black Lives Matter is that day, the first day that I hear the phrase, I need to have formulated, it's like, slow down.
Yes.
Like, doesn't mean don't ever form an opinion.
Right.
But don't feel like there's this urgency, like you have to know something right now. You're not the president.
Yeah.
You're not like changing the world with all of your opinions. Like, so take some time. And I'm trying to take some time, which means that there are a lot of opinions that I haven't even formed yet because, again, I haven't earned an opinion, right?
Right. I'm there. I'm right there with you. So, again, crock pot that stuff.
Yep.
Let the process happen.
Yep.
Slow it down a little bit. Let it cook. Let it marinate. And eventually it's going to be great.
Yep. Yep. So I think a lot of our listeners are just going to like you. If they like me, they're going to like you because have so much in common. I mean, if you're into the Enneagram, we're also the only, you're the only other Enneagram 6 that I know in the pro-life movement.
Yes.
I am an Enneagram 6.
Yes.
There's not a lot of us.
It isn't.
There's a lot of 3s and 8s and 2s.
I feel like I run into more 8s than anything.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, 8's just kind of natural. It's just like, I've never gotten to the Enneagram on the podcast. I'm really into the Enneagram. But, and a lot of people, it's going to freak you out.
It's okay.
Calm down.
It's okay. Yeah.
There are versions of people who get to the Enneagram where I agree it can become this kind of weird thing.
Yeah.
I just think it's part of how God wired us, and God wired us in really different ways, which helps me to have a better time dealing with all the different like leaders in the pro-life movement who are so different from me, and sometimes kind of drive me crazy. It's like, hey, but God wired them differently.
Yeah.
God wired an 8 differently than a 6.
And that's
a 3
okay.
different than a 6, and all that. So, anyway, you and I just like think so similarly and kind of so naturally. Yeah. And we're politically similar.
Yeah.
I just think we're going to have a good conversation. Okay. Yeah. So you planted a seed earlier, and I want us to get back to that because I've heard you talk a little bit about this. Talk about why there has to be a Black church.
Ooh. Yeah. So just to use a specific example, right? Yeah. So my dad was an AME Zion pastor for a long time. So, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, right? Yeah. Richard Allen, Absalom Jones. I don't know if a lot of people know that story, but the story of Richard Allen, he was a preacher in the Methodist Church, and Absalom Jones, friend of his. So just to make it real succinct, they were praying in the church they were attending at the time. Obviously, in that time frame, I think we're talking, late 1800s, 1900s, kind of. So don't quote me on this, but but that's the story in itself. They're praying at the altar, and then parishioners from the church came up to them, and they were like, "Hey, you got to get up. You're praying in the wrong spot."
Wow.
You're basically praying in the white spot.
It's like the water fountain thing, except where you pray in church. Oh my God.
And so Richard Allen was like, well, let us just finish praying. And then they was like, no, you got to get up now. So they rustle him up, get him out the church. At that point, Richard Allen, he didn't quit on the church. He said, this isn't right. Yeah. Lord, lead us. What should we do? And all those Black members, and he went and started the AME denomination.
Okay.
So that's what I mean by...
There needed to be a place where Black people could actually be safe to pray and not be harassed for it.
And just be able to walk out their faith. Wow. Right? So that's what I mean.
So depressing.
It is. It really is. But at the same time...
But understandable. I'm with him.
Like to make that move, like to have that gusto to say, you know what? I'm not going to quit on the church. I'm not going to quit on Jesus. I'm not going to quit on the faith. Yeah. But we got to have a safe place to go and walk out our faith. So then he started an entire denomination, which actually is the Black church. You know what I'm saying? Right, so that started this where Black churches had to form to walk out their faith. And I feel like a lot of us are scared to deal with that because is that the original biblical intent of church? Like, hey, Black church, go over here and, and because of how you're getting treated, you have to do this, right? Like we find that in scripture. No.
We imagine God wouldn't want the church to be as segregated as it even still is. Like my church is super white. Like I would say, like, I don't think like, I know the heart of our pastors would be like, they wouldn't want it to be super white.
Yeah. But it
is.
It is. Like, that's like where for me, I just get the flat, like it is like, okay. Yeah. So what do we do with that? Like what does that mean? You know what I mean? Moving forward. So, but I think in order to move forward, to be real about that history and what that has meant over the lifeline of specifically the church in America, what that has meant over its lifeline. Yeah. Where we are now, where we still have predominantly Blacks, predominantly white churches.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of people would be wondering then, okay, so like, why is that still the case? It makes sense 100 years ago or 150 years ago. Like if Black people need a place to pray, then and they need to have their own denomination just to pull that off. But they'd be like, hey, now, the way a lot of white conservatives think is like racism's like kind of in the past. Like it's not like it's over, really, right? So like I mean, beyond like there's like an obvious thing, and I'll say like, as far as like, the white church, black church thing, like there's some part of it that is like sometimes people have just like different preferences for like the worship music,
true,
or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's like cultural, stylistic things.
Yes.
I think it'd be good to try to see a little bit more, combining of those things. But
yeah,
I get people having preferences. I have preferences about, the people that I hear preach and things like that.
Yeah,
people can have preferences. I'm not one of those guys that's like, you pick a church and you have to be there for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Unless there's like a huge issue. Like, I think it's okay to kind of find a place where you can respect the leadership that is meeting your needs, but then that also you can serve. So I get that.
Yeah.
But a lot of other people would be like, no, even beyond that, there doesn't need, like, you can go and pray in, presumably most white churches and not be getting like harassed and told to move. So why does there need to be a black church now?
Right. Yeah. So that kind of gets into, I think, where you were, what I kind of heard in terms of the cultural aspect, right? Mm-hmm. So because that had to happen, right? What didn't go away is the cultural heaviness.
Yes.
Of the aim of the church, right? So the way I try to frame it is this cultural heaviness that kind of lays on top of all of us.
Yeah.
Like the black church protects blacks. Right. So it's
that's
like
the feeling.
Yeah. Like, so the black church and the communities then, Jim Crow and all that kind of stuff, and looking forward, protected black people. It gave us safe haven, safe harbor, like for everything you're going through. So whether it was police brutality, whether it was just, lynchings and trying to like all that kind of stuff, it's like the black church had to be the hub for all that, right?
Wow.
Now we move forward into what we see now and what the church actually means to a community. And the tones of that is still there, I feel like, in terms of to bring in a specific thing with the pro-life aspect of things. It's like in a black church, it's like, no. Don't bring that over here. We got it. We got ours.
Yeah.
It's this protected class kind of feel.
Yeah.
And it's like, we need to stay here in order to stay under our protection of our own.
Yeah.
So don't travel over there to the white church, to the good old boys. That's kind of the framework there. So it's like that cultural part is still heavy. We're not, I don't think we're necessarily dealing with that very well.
Yeah.
In order to create spaces of true worship together.
Yeah.
Black, white, whatever. You know what I'm saying? So it's like that cultural heaviness is just there. And it's like, it's something that we don't necessarily deal with very well as Christians.
Yeah. I want to get to how we could deal with it better soon, but I want to make sure people understand, especially like, if you're not part of a black church, then I don't think white people feel like a church is like their safe space. Right. Like it's this necessary for, like, it might be an emotionally safe place. Hopefully it's an emotionally safe place. If your church is not an emotionally safe place, you need to go.
Get out.
Leave. It's probably spiritually abusive or something like that. But it's different than what you're describing, where it really feels like this might be the only place where people they feel like they are protected. They're around people who will have their back. Yeah. If things go down, we're like,
almost,
white people don't go to church. So like, oh God, boy, I sure hope that people understand how I'm dealing with police brutality. Like, no, it's not, it's different.
Yeah.
And so what I hear you saying is, even if racism, the effects of racism were more extreme in the past, not super distant past.
Right. But the past.
We're not saying it's the exact same as it is now.
Right.
Culturally, like the ripple effects, there's ripple effects that still exist. I want us to talk about that too.
Yeah.
But there's ripple effects even from what happened in the past that are still felt.
Yeah.
We were talking yesterday about, like, you can have like grandparents who were like, had really, really bad stuff happen to them, and you're hearing those stories from them.
Yes.
And so then in the church, there's this like, we need to keep this. This is what I hear you say. I want to correct whatever I get wrong. But I hear you. I want to try to help translate. Like, there's this like, we're insulated. Mm-hmm. We're going to keep this a safe place by keeping the people in charge that ought to be in charge.
Yes.
And there's going to be a lot of like suspicion if white people come in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
A lot of times. Like, And I hear you also saying this kind of resentment if black people leave and like start attending white churches.
Yes.
So just flesh that out a little bit more. I want to make sure we understand before we try to unpack like all the whys and what nows.
Yeah. So to be really careful about this, because obviously I'm not speaking for Black folks.
Right.
But I think my experiences have just helped in trying to formulate just what's actually happening or what's not happening, rather, in terms of theological things, theological differences, rather, that are in a Black church and a white church, right? So even when it boils down to like, to not go down a rabbit hole here, but like to use certain things like speaking in tongues, that's in Pentecostal type Black churches, that's a big thing. And a Southern Baptist white church is like, you're nuts. Right. And it's like, okay, those are theological things that we don't agree with.
Right.
Okay, cool.
Right.
We should be able to like handle that. We can see in scripture certain things. We can talk it out. Kumbaya, eat Panera bread. Everybody's happy. Right.
Right.
So then it gets into this cultural aspect where what I was talking about, this protected, like, you ever wonder, because I go to a predominantly white church. Let me just throw that out there. Okay. Right. So it's like a Black man and a Black family going to a white church. And the acceptance is like, oh, we're so glad you're here. Yes, come over to the coffee bar. Let me take your kids over to the children's church. And it's like, oh, right?
Right.
A white person going to a Black church, immediate suspicion.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, well, you know, you're here. Like, we'll treat you nice.
Right.
Like, we're not going to not treat you nice. But there's kind of like this, you know, why is he here? Why? You know, like there's a reason, you know, like, does he really want to go to church here? You know, you got to watch over time. So it's kind of like, that's because of the culture and not so distant past and what we've had to deal with. Right. Right. And
white people on average are not going to be suspicious of a black family coming into their church. Like how much are they going to try to change things? Whereas I imagine Black people, if a white person goes like, hey, like, because we have done a lot of bad stuff, like there's an understandable suspicion, like, are they going to try to, like, is there going to be some kind of a power move or something that they're going to try to do, is what I hear you saying.
Yeah.
Like,
and that can be nuanced in so many different ways. Okay. But I feel like ultimately you get in trying to pin things to be like these big whys, and how do we work our way out of these whys into just to try to have normative fellowship where none of those things prayerfully matter. My true belief, and you could disagree with this, is just we're going to have this struggle until Jesus comes. Yeah. That's just kind of what I've come to accept, to be honest, and that's okay.
You don't mean, I assume, at the same level that we're having right now.
No.
But like, you're never going to have literally no racism. Yeah. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah. Like there's still so much is just charged in terms of language, in terms of cultural living types of things that are just happening each and every day, that we just, you know, whether we know about it or don't know about it, whether we read about it later on the news or whatever, it's like there's just stuff happening all the time. Yeah. And it's like, we're never just gonna like get at all the stuff and say, all right, Jesus, we got it. We got it. Take care of it. Like, I don't know.
We're fully like Jesus now, this side of heaven. Yeah, we're totally where we've made it.
Yeah, there's brokenness, there's sin, right? So it's like, okay.
And ignorance too. Like, there's so much that we don't understand. So it's like there's cultural differences. There's real cultural differences. Yeah. And it's just like I mean, we talk, you know, often about there being cultural differences between pro-life and pro-choice people, right? True. Like on average, you know, we say in the Equip for Life course, like, you know, it's almost like we speak different languages. So pro-life person can say X and pro-choice person hears Y. Or pro-choice person says A and pro-life person hears B. And it's just like we just miss each other. Even like well-meaning people who are trying not to straw man, who are trying to build money, like we just miss each other because we're using language differently. Yep. Or we just don't understand. And so then you get into like, you know, stuff that like Jonathan Haidt talks about, where it's just like psychologically speaking, like it's been kind of demonstrated, conservatives on average are driven by things that are different than people on the left are driven by. And so like, it's like we're just kind of wired different. Our brains are just working differently. Yeah. And which makes it harder for us to truly understand each other. Not impossible, but just harder. Yeah. And I hear you saying, that happens with white and Black people too. Like there's just so many differences that I can't understand.
Yep.
What it's like to grow up even right now in America as a Black person, and like to understand what it's like to get, I mean, I freak out when I get pulled over, but I know it's nothing like what it's going to be for the average Black. I know that. I know I can't really understand it. And it's like, why, like yesterday when we went to Starbucks, like, I'm going to ask you probably a dumb white person question. But it's like, but I want to understand better than I do right now. But there's so much still I don't understand.
Yeah.
So we're just going to miss each other sometimes.
Yeah. And it's like, that's okay for a moment, right? We don't want to necessarily just sit in that, right? Like, it's kind of like, what I mean by that, to be specific, is, you know, like if we're missing each other, it's like, okay, what I feel like a lot of my white brothers and sisters do is, because we're missing each other, because of why they think we're missing each other, then that stops us from actually dealing with one another. If that makes sense.
Because maybe we assume that the differences are just like political or something and not something else.
Yeah. And it's like,
talk about that.
So it's like, so we use that as the pawn, to not actually sit down and talk.
Oh, he's just a liberal.
Yeah.
He's just whatever. So of course he thinks differently than
so
me.
It's like they'll just immediately throw you and everything about you away because of that thing. And it's like, wait a minute, what I want to see and encourage. Yeah. I think that's more of the pastoral heart of me, man. That like, hey man, let's sit down and continually talk through certain things, even if they're difficult. Yeah. Like we as I feel like as Christians, we suck at being able to sit down and have tough conversations. Yeah. Because we immediately run to our corners and go get all our corners talking points and bring them back to the conversation and be like, boom, I got you there. It's like, no, man. Like, as believers, if we're trying to leave this thing where we can, okay, cool, we might not all the way agree on this, but you know me, I know you, you know, again, let's go to Panera Bread. Let's go somewhere. But there's a reason for that. Real quick, there's a joke for that. Because every time I have a meeting, my oldest daughter, she's like, I bet you said Panera Bread. And I'm like,
because you're a meeting with a white person?
Yeah,
is that why? I was going to say, it feels like a very white example to go to Panera and meet with someone named Mike. Yeah. I get it.
And then I'll be walking out the door and she'll be like, see you later, Dad. And I'm like, oh, this girl is too smart. But that's more of what I'm talking about, man. Yeah. Like, let's do this. Like, that's why I feel like me and you have just over the years, like, because we can, you know, it's cool. Like, if you have these thoughts, man, I don't know. Josh might be onto something. Or it's like, I don't know about that, but that's okay. Right. Like, help me flesh that out because you're getting to know me. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like,
there's like a trust thing where it's like, even if I end up saying something politically correct or ignorant because I just don't understand enough, like, I feel like if I do that, you don't instantly go to, oh, see, he's just you know, kind of dumb, white, conservative, racist guy. Like there's it's like that relational apologetics thing. It's like I talk about, like, it's important for, like, when you're doing relational apologetics, for like these genuine friendships, for you guys to have this thing where you understand that each other are both thoughtful and virtuous. Yeah. Like I'm not pro-life because I hate women and I want them to, you know, go back to, you know, the good old days in the early 1900s. Like, that's not what actually is going on for me. It's this other thing going on for me. Right. And that makes a powerful court. And it's like you understand enough about me that, you know, like, if I make a mistake, it's accidental or ignorant, and you can just help me understand. And you don't just jump into, you know, jumping all over me, which makes me feel safe.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
To ask risky questions. Yeah. Because I know you get me, or you get my heart, and it's going to be okay. Yeah. And that's really important. So I wonder if that also goes on a lot, because there's also, like, you know, on one hand,
ooh, that's huge.
There's a lot of people who just there is a lot of I think there is more ignorance among even young white people now than we would expect. True. In this kind of like age of information where like we understand all these things. Like that happens. Yeah. And because I listen to enough Black people talk about this stuff, I'm like, yeah, that's legit. But there's also, especially among Gen Z, a very strong fear of offending other people too. Yeah. Not to like paint with a super broad brush. I know there's exceptions, but like generally speaking, that is more of a present thing than for Gen X, for example. Clearly. Right. Yeah. And so then there's like, that thing where you're describing, like, where we can talk and it'll be okay if, like, we stumble a little bit. Well, for a lot of people, they're afraid of stumbling because they're afraid of, am I going to super offend you? Or am I going to get canceled because now, like, you're going to be, like, on Instagram Live, like, let me tell you what this idiot just said or whatever. So
that's like a headache.
How do we make this better?
Yes.
What does our society need to do?
It's like there's so many things in what you just said that are so good, because all of that, to me, has to have a firm foundation of a relationship.
Yep.
All of that stuff cannot be completed or talked through in a good way unless we have a relationship.
It's not happening on Twitter.
With
strangers.
Like I used to be horrible at that. I would get into all kind of Facebook comment fights, man. And I mean, it's like 300 comments later.
I've done the same thing.
It's like, you can't understand anything. It's like, okay. And I don't even know this person. I have no idea their plight, their thought process, their family, like how they like operate, but
they sure as hell don't get you either, by the way.
Exactly. So it's like, I had to stop and just be like, okay. And my wife, she was real. Oh gosh, thank God.
Isn't it important to have the voice of reason that we're married to? And be like, maybe just.
And she's
put it away.
And she's such a beautiful young lady that she has such a beautiful spirit, but she has this direct way of saying, get off Facebook. Like, stop.
Put the phone down.
Like, turn it over, turn it off. Fast from it, whatever you need to do.
Yeah.
But it's starting to consume you, but what's not consuming us, and I'm being specific again, because, and we'll get into this, because of relationships with believers and non-believers that I'm intentional about. But believers, again, the relationship part, we come to the relationship table with all our dispositions and just like how we feel about, well, if I say this, I know how he's going to respond. So I'm just waiting for it. I'm bracing myself. Versus take all that stuff, take it out your pockets, dismay, misunderstood, scared, nervous, take all that stuff, put it to the side, and just come to the relationship table and be like, hey, Josh, how are you? Like, what's your story, Josh? Give me your story, man. Like, that for me has created so many relationships over the years with literally racist. There's guys that are my friends now, white guys, who at the beginning of our relationship called me everything under the sun.
Really?
For different reasons.
Wow.
But I refuse to bend to, you get to do that. Like, no, you don't know me.
Right.
So if we're in the same city, in the same space, in the same area, you know what? Let's go to lunch. Like, we're going to talk about this.
Yeah.
Like, when people would say things on Facebook, I transformed it like, where you live?
Right.
like, are you close? You know what I'm saying? Like, or if you're far away, you know what? I got a Zoom account. You want Zoom?
I'll meet you at Panera if you're local. Buying.
Yes.
So you've basically done what Daryl Davis has done.
Yes.
I mean, he's done it with like legit KKK members. I don't know if you've done that.
Yeah,
he's like my hero, man.
That dude is amazing.
So great.
Yeah.
But like you've done the same thing where it's like, let's get a meal.
Yeah.
Let's talk, even if they are super, super racist.
Yeah.
You're willing to sit down with them.
Like, it's whatever.
Man.
Like, but to bring this into a space of the pro-life world, I feel like specifically that's the same thing. That's the same elements. It's like pro-life over here, pro-choice over here. They never necessarily, without predisposed intentions, come to a table and just say, I'm going to leave pro-life over here. I'm going to leave pro-choice over here. Who are you?
As a person.
As a person.
Yeah.
And now that kind of helps me understand why maybe you think this way. And that's okay.
It's so important.
You know what I mean? Like, it's okay.
It's so important.
And that for me, it's like I draw a lot of that from my faith when I think about just Christ and how he dealt with, just different people as he was just walking around and, healing folks and be like, oh, there's this guy up in the tree. Like, come down here. Let's go to lunch. Let's go to Panera Bread. Right. You know what I'm saying? It's like that's where to me
he met people where they were at.
That's the epitome of, so like a Daryl Davis and people like that. Like that's walking out the faith for real.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? Like to sit down with somebody who doesn't believe how you believe, but their anthropology matters.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Their life story matters, how they were brought up, all that kind of stuff. Are you willing to sit down and take time for that? And usually we're not.
Like, this is the thing that, like, all the stories when I do relational apologetics talks, and I'll link to it. I'll link to, there's a video of me doing this talk. But like the stories that I tell all have in common is that of being able to meet people where they're at. So like Megan Phelps Roper, who grew up in Westboro Baptist Church, super homophobic little cult church in Kansas that's famous for doing these horrible protests and military funerals. Like what got her out of that was the fact that people started engaging her on Twitter.
Yeah.
And then a few of those people would pay attention to when and where they were doing protests, and they would go and meet her face to face.
Yes.
And they would bring her flowers or gifts or chocolates or whatever and be like, hey, it's me from Twitter. And they would talk face to face.
Yeah.
And then they continue those conversations.
Yeah.
Or what Daryl Davis did. Or even like the there was this private Facebook debate group that I was in for like a year that kind of got me going on this relational apologetics thing I was hanging out with the same pro-choice people for like a year.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we learned from that's like right in line with what you're saying, the only reason, and this was not my idea, someone else smarter had this idea and set up this rule pretty early on, that helped humanize each other. Yeah. Instead of us thinking of each other as pro-life and pro-choice avatars or bots, it was like we had this rule, free forum Fridays. On Fridays, we were not allowed to talk about abortion. You could talk about anything other than abortion.
Nice.
And so it might have been as surfacey as TV shows that we were addicted to at the time, or it might have been sometimes as deep as people talking about miscarriages, about people talking about, there was, I remember, I'll never forget, one woman was going through like a domestic abuse situation. Wow, and she was sharing like only with us about that. Like,
that's huge.
And we're trying to like obviously encourage her to get help and like all of that, which is like just staying there. But it's like it got deep and personal, and we understood a bit about who each other were outside of pro-life and pro-choice.
Yeah,
which helped humanize each other and helped that even the conversations about pro-life and pro-choice to be a lot better. And I hear you saying like that has to happen in these conversations.
Has to. Like I'm just that's one thing that I feel like culminated to Major League Dad. Like, and that conviction that I talk about is like, I can't keep fighting this fight and ignoring what I know. Yeah. Like, I can't. Yeah. Like, it gave me goosebumps. Like, I see too many, especially when I was working in the local center, and like 80 to 90% of those guys that I saw looked just like me. And I mean that black, right? Yeah. So it's like, okay. But when I hear their stories, and I leave, and I'm sharing this, and I know people will probably see this, but like this nickname of Gare Bear is something that used to follow me because like I really want to care about like, man.
You're like a Care Bear.
Yeah, so it's really weird. And it's like, I'm brave enough to say this now. My good friend Cindy at CareNet, Cindy Hawkins, she just retired actually. She's was one of the vice presidents at CareNet, and that was like our little inside thing. And she'd be like, "Hey, Care Bear." So, but my thing is like, I feel like God wired me that way.
Yeah.
And so when I go into these neighborhoods, I go into these situations and start trying to just strike up conversations with little hood boys or little hood girls and families and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, I know that for one, what that looks like, but those stressors and things that you're dealing with is like, there's a show that I love, New Amsterdam. And
I love that show.
Yeah. So
I'm way behind now, but the first couple of seasons or whatever.
Man, it's so good. But good. The medical director guy, he always says, "How can I help?"
Yes.
I love that because that's where I feel like if I go in with that mentality, all my whatever I'm thinking has to stay back here because I have to listen to you in order to know how I can help.
Right.
And
instead of coming in with these like preconceived notions, like, here's how we always do it or whatever, it's just like,
so even how the church deals with like community outreach and homelessness and all this kind of stuff, they don't go in, and this is something that and this is black or white church, whatever. Don't go into a space and say, here's how I'm helping you. Be happy. No. How can I help? So if you have this heart to go out and to do, go in with the heart to hear from people, build relationships, then you see what they actually need. Yeah. And then you act accordingly that way.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So
don't just do like, okay, well, we always do outreach in this way.
Right.
So we're going to do it in that way. And it's like, maybe they need something different.
Yeah,
like
stop.
And you're only going to know that if you actually listen to them.
Yeah, so
but we don't want to do that.
Real quick, yeah. It's like, we don't. So I started working with a men's homeless shelter, right, in Raleigh. And I called the program director, and she was a sweet lady. So we're just talking, and she was like, okay, explain to me Major League Dad. What are you trying to do? And I asked the question. I was like, hey, I have some friends. I'm putting out a clothing drive, but what kinds of clothes do they need? And she just paused. And she was like, nobody has ever asked.
Wow.
Because people always bring in all their
worst
junk,
stuff that they already have.
Yeah, like that just take to Goodwill, they bring here and think And she's like, these people, they need underwear.
Yeah.
They need socks because it's getting cold. Because they put 4 or 5 pair of socks on at one time. They need lots of them. Some of them have job interviews. So if you have polo shirts, like not just t-shirts, like so at this moment, if you could collect those things and bring them in. So I was able to be specific to the channels that I was reaching out to. Yeah. And this lady, so now she calls me for, hey, Major League Dad, Gary, come on. Like, would you come do this drive with us? So we're gonna hopefully in November do a coat drive and all this kind of stuff.
How quickly you stood out from everyone else just by saying,
literally just by saying that.
How can I help you guys specifically?
And think about that, Josh, because there's not a shortage of people trying to help, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that she said, she was like blown away. She was like, nobody's ever asked that. But it's not a shortage of people trying to throw their thing in and say, you need this. So
to bring it back to something you said earlier that I want to make sure is translated. So when you talked about a church will be like, well, that's not part of our agenda. I think what a lot of times that means, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of times what that means is it's not the way that we usually do things.
Yes.
And so we don't want to go outside of that. We've got these kind of
our system works.
Our system works. It feels safe. It's not scary. We just kind of do our thing. But it's like, but what if the way that you usually do things is not going to be the most helpful to these particular people? Like, are you willing to think outside the box and do things differently?
Yeah.
Or even explore whether there are better ways to do things?
And it's even safe to say that, I've been a part of situations where I've been brought in to consult on certain things and all that. And it's like everybody's all engaged and like, man, you've given us so much to think about. But what happens when I leave and you go back to your boardrooms and your meeting rooms and you put these outside of the box ideas up against your systems? Usually what happens is you have to consider the one main thing is, will this affect our money? Like just being real, like is this going to affect the giving? And if it affects the giving, what does that mean? Are we willing to
make that sacrifice?
Right, make that sacrifice, right.
That risk or whatever.
Yeah, and that's a hard question for a lot of pastors. Especially when the dynasty or whatever of the church has been built on a certain thing. So now you're saying, man, we got to get out here. We got to go support this and we got to go do this and it's like, well, in order to do that, if you ask the question, how can I help? Then you get the answers and it's like, whoa, we're not equipped for that. We're not built for that. Well, yes, you are. You're the church. You are. There's people all throughout this congregation that need to be lit on fire to go do what God has called them to do in their sphere of influence. And sometimes that can be outside of your system, outside of your box, and that can stop giving. That can cause people to leave the church, and you're scared of that. So because you're scared of that, you do nothing. Or you just keep throwing your way out there even more to say, look at us, look what we're doing, but you're not actually helping.
I'm going to make a guess that a lot of the people that are still listening to this podcast, like who haven't, tuned in one time because there's this pro-life podcast and then got quickly offended and left, went to go listen to there's many other pro-life podcasts that might be more in line with what people are wanting to hear. And I get that. That's fine. So the people are still listening to this. I think there's a lot of people who would be accurately described as they're white pro-lifers. They're probably somewhat conservative, maybe not extreme, far right. But on the conservative end of politics. And would say they really, really don't want to say things or do things that are cringy. Or racist in any way. And if they ever do, they literally have no idea. There's just a pure ignorance. Like I hate sometimes that the word ignorance is used in a pejorative negative way. Like sometimes
I got
it's just like innocent ignorance.
Yeah. Like,
it's not ideal.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of like, oh, bless your heart. Like
bless
that kind
heart.
of thing.
The good old sound like, bless your heart.
That's the thing. And so for them, I think a lot of them it's like, tell me what I need to understand. I want to know.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, I just don't know the things right now. So like, what do you wish white conservatives understood better?
Yes.
About the plight of the modern African American in America, not just the pro-life movement.
Yes,
I mean, that too.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But also just like what is going on.
Oh boy. So
2 minutes for lunch.
Yeah. I was about to be like, you know what? I don't know if that can happen, so I'm sorry. But I can try and make that succinct. But I think to go back to the thought of how can I help, right? A lot of pro-life movements or speakers or whatever, they make a lot of their, influence and things based off of arguments that are charged in political settings, right? So my thing is, even if like I speak at a banquet or I do something like that in a practice center, they're the big fundraiser, you want to raise money and all that kind of stuff. My challenge is more, yes, you need the money to make the pregnancy center work and to do what it needs to do. But if you're really worried about, saving that baby and protecting that young lady, even if you want to serve fathers and you see God's design needing to be, reignited and served and all that kind of stuff, I think a lot of times my white brothers and sisters forget that there's life after your center. I say a lot of times when I'm like doing a training or something, it's like, I want to train this guy so that when he leaves here, or meet with this guy, that when he leaves and him and his girlfriend are sitting at the next red light and it's awkward and they just both had this discussion at this pregnancy center, the people were really nice. They gave us all kind of great stuff, but they go back to environments, right, that are full of stress, that are full of anger, that are full of all these different types of things. They're full of parents that are trying to, and that can work on either side, whether black or white couple. And they're going back to families that's like, you're going to embarrass us. Like you can't, you're the daughter of the pastor and it's like, you can't do that or whatever. Right. That part, I feel like is where we're missing the mark. And that goes more into, especially as a black man, in my plight, in terms of how I just have to live each and every day. What I have to do to actually just be in a majority white culture. So even to break that down a little bit more, there's certain ways, especially I'm 6'2", 340 pounds. So I got a lot of work to do in terms of to not make myself seem right. To, if I'm in white spaces. But at the same time, it's like there's certain movements, there's certain facial expressions, there's certain ways I know I have to present myself because of who I am.
Wow.
So that's the subtleness of all that has happened in our country to this point for me. So don't think racism as a thing of, well, I ain't lynching nobody, so I'm not racist.
Right.
Does your environment still breed for me that I can't be who I am unless I assimilate to your environment? And that's really something that is not, especially in the church world and in the pro-life world, what I've seen is like you have to check boxes in order to be black and in this pro-life space.
What kinds of boxes?
So, did you vote for Trump? Yeah. Or, okay, you didn't, but do you believe this? Did you know that, your people, black folks, are the number one, do you know the rate that y'all are getting aborted? And you have to agree to this in terms of just that pure fact and not trying to understand any other stressor that I get to talk about from the other side that is trying to talk about those things.
Yeah.
So you have to check that box. Well, then if you start talking about anything different from the talking point, like there's no space for me to bring anything else in as a black man.
From a different perspective.
Right. Of just being a black man. Like there's no other way to talk about just daily things. You know what I'm saying? Like to not be corny, but to really spend a week in my shoes, you know, and this is just me.
Yeah.
I told you the other day, like, I have my daddy baby bag or whatever, right? And I'm walking with my kids and we're going in the store and I haven't even made it into the store yet. And it's like, okay, hey, let me check that. And I literally watch other guys, white guys, women, everybody with their big bags that could take stuff too.
Right.
They just walk right past me as you take your stick and rummage through my stuff.
Right.
Okay, it's subtle things, man. So I'm bringing that to this pro-life discussion of as a Black couple who comes into your pregnancy center, right? And they're dealing with all this stress. Yeah. Like, yes, you're triaging me for this, you know, decision of life. Thank you. We need it. Thank you. But when I leave here, my environment is going to be such a volatile space, physically, emotionally, mentally. Like, care about that as well. Yeah. And what Major League Dad for me is be proactive in caring about that.
Yeah.
So even if I come to your pregnancy center, if I'm already in the community and a lot of these stressors are getting eliminated, she finds out she's pregnant, she gets to come to your center. Yeah. It's a different discussion.
Hey, this is Josh. So this conversation with Gary went way longer than we had originally intended. So we have decided after the fact to split this conversation into 2 parts. And so we're going to break here, and then we will resume this conversation in the next episode.